It was once said that northern England possessed three main wonders. The first was York Minster, the second, Hadrian's Wall, and the third, the Settle and Carlisle Railway. This is a railway with the distinction of being the highest and one of the most spectacular main lines in England, reaching a height of over 1,100 feet as it winds a tortuous path through the high peaks of the Pennines. The scenic splendors of the Settle and Carlisle Railway are matched only by the harsh and extreme weather conditions experienced at these altitudes. Frequent storms in summer and heavy snow in winter account for a hefty 70 inches of precipitation a year. The consequences can be severe, at best causing long delays as trains struggle through thick snow, at worst resulting in deep drifts that can block the line for days at a time. The particularly harsh winter of 1963 produced drifts up to 30 feet deep, burying stations and embedding trains. Weather conditions in this area can change dramatically. Storms often clear as quickly as they start, revealing the true splendor of the fell scenery. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about this railway is the fact that it was built at all. By the 1870s, the Cumbrian Fells had already been crossed at Shap by the London and North Western Railway, giving them access to Scotland. The Midland Railway Company had no such route, so an agreement was made, and their trains shared the route over Shap. But this arrangement between two rival companies never lasted. The Midland found their trains increasingly took second place, with passengers waiting hours in remote sidings, or else delayed mischievously behind slow freight trains. So the Midland decided the only solution was to build their own railway from Carlisle over the fells to Settle. These fells presented a formidable barrier to the railway builders of the 19th century. To cross them, a climb to over 1,000 feet was necessary, requiring the construction of a series of massive engineering structures. In fact, a total of 17 viaducts and over 2 miles of tunnel. Ribblehead Viaduct was one of these structures, carrying the railway at a height of over 100 feet over the moorland below. The navvies employed on such works feared, in particular, the strong winds sweeping across this exposed valley. Winds strong enough to pluck workmen from the timber staging that enmeshed piers which provided a platform for both machinery and stonemasons. Such remarkable feats of construction required a vast workforce. At any one time, a total of 5,000 men toiled on the line, enduring the hardships of this windswept landscape. Gradually, an elegant and slender-looking structure emerged, one with tremendous strength derived from foundations sunk over 25 feet into the peaty moorland. Undoubtedly, such structures were among the wonders of the age, leading one traveller to remark, The railway consists of a magnificent succession of high viaducts and deep tunnels carrying the line as if by magic through fell and over valley. If the viaducts carried the line over the valleys, then Blee Moor Tunnel pushed it many hundreds of feet below the fells. If conditions for the navvies working on the viaducts were bad, they were appalling for those employed as miners. Working conditions were neatly summed up by a visitor in 1874. No person could walk in the tunnel and listen to the reverberations of blasting, see the miners wielding with terrible force their sledgehammers when drilling the hard rock, and breathe the thick smoke of the exploded dynamite without feeling sympathy for those employed in such conditions. High above the tunnel lie the huge piles of rock blasted from beneath the moor, a vivid reminder of the sheer size of the workings. The foul and suffocating air in the tunnels was ventilated by massive shafts sunk down from the moorland above. Far below, the hazards and dangers of dynamite claimed many lives. The tiny churchyard at Chapel le Dale bears witness to the human costs of construction, containing the remains of over 200 men. Some perished falling from viaducts. Some were crushed by rockfalls, while many succumbed to the effects of cold and disease. There were others who simply gave in to despair and hanged themselves. Between Ribblehead Viaduct and Blee Moor Tunnel lies an area of bare and rugged moorland. When Allport, the line's surveyor, arrived here in 1870, he described it as that lonely and desolate place. Looking round, it's easy to see why. To the west, the vast and bare outline of Whernside dominates the skyline. To the south, the peaks of Ingleborough and Pennygent watch over the moor. Before the railway arrived, the moor was, in the words of one traveller, devoid of any trace of human habitation or even of any sort of shelter for man and beast. The scene seems very much the same today. Most of the cottages built here to house railway workers have long since been either demolished or abandoned. Only the signal box remains in use, occupied in 8-hour shifts by a solitary signalman. Further north on the highest section of the line lies Dent. Situated here is the highest and possibly the most inconvenient station in England, the village of Dent being situated over 4 miles away down the valley. It's hardly surprising that trains stopped calling here in 1970, leaving the subsequent scene of dereliction and decay disturbed only by the passing of the occasional train. The weather at these heights can be appalling at times. In the summer of 1870, a terrific storm erupted on the fells surrounding the station. Workmen had to swim for their lives as a torrent of water swept past the station into the valley, leaving in its wake considerable damage and destruction. Further north at Garsdale Station, the weather was responsible for more strange and improbable happenings. On a wild and windy night around the turn of the century, an engine was being prepared for duty on the turntable at the end of the station. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind caught the locomotive broadside on, strong enough to set the machine spinning as if on some crazy merry-go-round. For several minutes, the crew stood by helplessly until someone hit on the idea of pouring sand into the pit, thus bringing the loco to a halt. To prevent such an unlikely recurrence, a stockade was constructed, the foundations of which can still be seen 20 years after the turntable was abandoned. Finally, north of Garsdale, the trains surmount the summit of the line. The signal box here was abandoned several years ago, leaving a derelict and lonely scene. Beyond Askill, the line descends steadily, eventually reaching Carlisle. This railway, with its alpine gradients and climb to over 1,000 feet, has always made great demands on its fleet of locomotives. Until the 1960s, scenes like these were an everyday occurrence as engines fought their way up to the summit of Askill. Since then, the sight and sound of steam power has become a thing of the past. Except, that is, for a few days each year when preserved engines are brought out and run on the line, giving us the chance to relive the splendor of steam power against the magnificent backdrop of fell scenery. Perhaps the best way to enjoy the sights and scenery of the Settle and Carlisle Railway is to take one of the few remaining passenger trains and travel the 72 miles over the fells to Carlisle. The Settle and Carlisle Railway has often been dubbed the line that should never have been built. These magnificent arches are the byproduct of the intense intercompany rivalry of the Victorian age. It is perhaps inevitable that they should succumb to a very different age. Within a matter of years, the trains that run over them will be withdrawn, the tracks lifted, and the Settle and Carlisle Railway will have become a memory.
These fells have always provided the ideal backdrop to a range of motive power. The video that follows shows both steam and diesel traffic over the Settle and Carlisle during the last 10 years. Winter conditions at these altitudes can be harsh. Even the mildest of winters can result in frequent snowfalls and blizzard conditions. Drifts rapidly accumulate in these conditions. The winter of 1981-82 was one of the worst for years, with snow lying in deep drifts from December right through to March. Despite these Arctic conditions, traffic remained largely uninterrupted. Kirkby Stephen after heavy snowfall in December 1981. A Class 47 passes through on a northbound freight. The same day, and a southbound freight approaches Ace Gill. On either side of the track, the snow lies in drifts of up to 5 feet deep. Ribblehead Viaduct, Christmas Eve 1981. No freight traffic today. Just a morning southbound passenger hauled by a Class 47. Snow clearance was left to a solitary Class 25, seen here at Horton in Ribblesdale, running south. In the past, snow ploughs had been used to clear a path through deep drifts between Ribblehead and Garsdale. If conditions look arduous in the winter, they could be just as unpleasant in the summer, with gale-force winds and heavy rain. Cloud and mist often descend within a matter of minutes, reducing visibility to just a few yards. This Class 47 passes over Artengill Viaduct, just below a thick blanket of cloud moving rapidly down the fellside. Dull, overcast conditions are commonplace. Artengill again, this time in 1980 with a northbound passenger. Long periods of rainfall are a feature of the high fells. In the spring of 1980, a Class 47 approaches Aysgill from the south, passing through a veil of heavy rain. The south end of Bleemore Tunnel. This remote spot was over 3 miles from the nearest road. Another Class 47 approaches the tunnel on a northbound passenger in the spring of 1980. A southbound passenger at Artengill Viaduct, again in the spring of 1980. Steam over the Settle and Carlisle was an everyday sight until the 1960s. All day and night, a succession of steam haul trains fought their way up to the summit at Aysgill. The days of upward of 40 steam haul trains a day may have gone forever, but in recent years some steam work has been reintroduced in the form of enthusiast specials hauled by a variety of preserved locomotives. April 1982. An irregular visitor to the Settle and Carlisle, Duchess of Hamilton, approaches Appleby with a southbound Cumbrian mountain Pullman. Almost 3 years later, on the 7th of January 1984, the Duchess worked another southbound train. She's seen here, shortly before sunset, climbing up grade at Smaardale. City of Wells is another regular visitor. She's seen here in April 1983, storming over Ribblehead Viaduct with a northbound train. Three days later, a bank holiday, the same engine worked south. She's climbing up grade about 2 miles from Appleby. Conditions here were reasonable, but on the higher sections of the line at Askill, she was to encounter heavy rain and strong winds. On December the 27th and 28th, two specials ran, hauled by Stanier Black 5 5305. On the 27th, mist and a steady downpour has descended on all but the lowest sections of the line. At Horton in Ribblesdale, 5305 was working hard on slippery rails, climbing towards Blee Moor. The following day, the 28th. For the first time in 3 days, the cloud began to break up and the sun appeared. 5305 approaches Appleby on the southbound run. At Appleby, the usual run past was rendered all the more spectacular as the sun broke through, providing perfect photographic conditions. Cloud was reluctant to clear from the high fells. This viewpoint is high above Burkitt Tunnel, giving a perfect view of the line. Just half an hour before sunset, and a 50-mile-per-hour gale sends steam and smoke across the valley as 5305 climbs towards Aysgill. Steam specials like this were occasional visitors to the Settle and Carlisle. Freight traffic was, until 1983, a regular and an essential feature of the line. Even in the 1970s, a steady stream of freights lumbered over the summit at Aysgill. April 1983, and a Class 45 hauls a 7-tunnel junction freight through Garsdale. Class 40s were common on freight workings. This southbound train approaches the summit in April 1983. By 1983, only 4 freights were scheduled over the line each weekday. In May of the same year, they were to finish altogether. Ribblehead Viaduct and the penultimate week of through freight operation. A Class 40 on a train bound for Carlisle. Later on the same day, the only southbound freight ran behind a Class 46, a far cry from the days when upwards of 20 freights a day passed over the line. The withdrawal of freight traffic sealed the fate of the Settle and Carlisle. From May 1983, its function as a north-south freight route was at an end. Unfitted freight had almost disappeared from British Rail, and the remaining block trains could use the electrified route over Shap. This was just one of several milestones that marked the sad decline of this railway. A year earlier, in May 1982, through trains from Nottingham were withdrawn and replaced by an awkwardly timed local service from Leeds to Carlisle. From this date, the Settle and Carlisle was no longer an intercity route. In recent years, a surprising variety of diesel power has survived to work just 4 passenger trains a day. Class 40s were occasional and popular visitors to the line. The morning Leeds-bound passenger is seen here approaching Settle. The line between Dent and Bleemore offers some superb photographic locations. In May 1983, 2 unusual visitors to the line, a Class 31 and a Class 40, crossed this, the highest section. Regular motive power came in the form of Class 47s, seen here at Dent, Kirkby Stephen and Horton in Ribblesdale. DMUs were fairly uncommon, except, that is, for certain Saturdays in the summer, when they worked the Dales rail trains. The only trains, in fact, to stop at the intermediate stations. They're seen here at Kirkby Stephen, Appleby and Bleemore. The Settle and Carlisle served a vital function in recent years as a diversionary route. A Sunday was often the busiest day of the week, as a succession of Class 47s hauled trains of Mark III stock non-stop between Carlisle and the junctions at Hellifield and Settle. Diverted trains are seen here at Dent Head Viaduct and Dent Station. The last diverted passenger train on the 8th of May crosses the Dent Head Viaduct, followed half an hour later by another Class 47 on a parcels train. The Settle & Carlisle has always been a popular route for diesel-hauled special trains, particularly in recent years with the threat of closure. A pair of Class 40s approached Bleemore Tunnel in the summer of 1983. Appleby on the 7th of January 1984, and a Class 45 hauled the northbound portion of the Cumbrian Mountain Pullman. Within a few years, these through trains would become a thing of the past. This train at Appleby gives a clue as to the future, for this train terminates just a few miles from here at Warcock. Within a few years, trains over this, the highest section of the line, will have become a memory.